Jess, welcome to another episode of the Explosion Ninja podcast.
Thank you again for having me on. I say like there was a different option, but here we are anyway.
So today we're going to be talking about some digital marketing news, of course, as always. We are also going to be discussing B2B lead gen and the video that's just gone live. I had some really interesting feedback and questions on that, and as well as some other videos this week. You're going to be sharing your brand of the week.
I am indeed.
And I'm going to be sharing a bit of a lesson on our own digital marketing. And then we're going to end up with the marketing fail of the week too. So Jess, do you want to start us off with some news?
Yes, absolutely. But just before we get started, just so everyone knows, even though this is live, we will not be responding to questions at the end because it's kind of a little double thing where we're recording our podcast and doing a live stream. So feel free to leave comments and questions, but we will not get to them till the end, just so it doesn't ruin our mojo, our flow.
Yes.
So, yeah. But with that said, I shall hop into the marketing news. So there are a couple of things. I feel like we say this every week. One of them is, in fact, Twitter. It's always Twitter. There's always something to say about Twitter at the moment. And this week, it is Twitter fighting with Apple, number one, as well as issues with lots of advertisers leaving the platform. We can see that there's still a lot of unrest, I would say, happening on Twitter at the moment. What's your take on it all, Tim?
There is. I mean, I think the unrest is actually getting a bit worse, isn't it? So, the latest thing with Apple, it's been reported last few hours, really, that Elon's been sort of picking fights with Apple, and apparently Apple has threatened to bump Twitter from the Apple App Store, which will be absolutely huge. Twitter's also removed their COVID misleading information policy. The wording that they've removed is that any content that's demonstrably false or misleading may lead to significant risk of harm, may not be shared on Twitter. So that's now gone. So if you want to share content that's misleading or may lead to significant risk of harm, go for it. I mean, all of these obviously are sort of brand safety red flags, aren't they? And you mentioned the advertiser exodus. Twitter wasn't a huge advertising player anyway, but I think half of their top 10 advertisers have now left. This is not looking good for Twitter's ongoing revenue, and it's just really strange.
It is. It really is strange, and it is interesting to see the choices made about misleading information, having that alert come up when there's been claims that Twitter's going to be the most accurate source of information on the internet. So it seems like what's happening and what's being said aren't really matching. Obviously, you mentioned about the loss in revenue. So head of Twitter, Elon, has said that they would like to try and rival YouTube in terms of video content by enticing creators over by saying, we're going to give you a bigger revenue split than any of the other platforms. But YouTube already gives quite a good revenue split already. And it's questionable as to whether the reason they do that is because they want to make more profit, or is it because they can't give creators more, otherwise they'll go under? Because surely creators are the backbone of YouTube, so YouTube's going to want to try and give them the best deal possible, whereas Twitter hasn't been built from the same place. So it's going to be really tough for them to be able to just rebuild the whole platform in order to, offer this revenue split to video creators. Like it just doesn't make sense. It's a very bizarre option for Twitter to take.
Yeah, I think as a marketer, I would absolutely love for Twitter to win, and I would love for there to be a text-based advertising platform where you could target your audience really effectively and you get great data, conversion tracking would be awesome, but like all of that stuff, I think that'd be fantastic. That hasn't really been Twitter's business model. Twitter's business model has kind of been, you can build your brand on here and then monetize off platform. So there was a conversation between Elon and Mr. Beast, I think, where Elon was saying, maybe we should take on YouTube and make Twitter the go-to place for video creators. And Mr. Beast was like, well, how are you going to do that? Like, YouTube is really good at monetizing its audience, really good at sharing revenue with creators. It's going to take a lot to make them move over. And Elon was saying, well, we're going to improve the amount that we can pay to creators, which to a lot of people watching is just impossible. I can't see how Twitter is going to be able to monetize that audience better than YouTube is. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I'd have to say that Elon's vision for Twitter is quite compelling. When you hear him talking about it, Elon's vision for Twitter is quite compelling. But at the moment, it seems like it's more destruction. You got to break some eggs to make an omelet. I know that, but there's like a whole load of eggshell on the floor, and it doesn't seem to be that much omelet in the pan. So yeah, like you say, every week we say this, but we're keeping an eye on it and seeing what it means for marketers.
Absolutely. And if you are a marketer that's like worrying about Twitter and every time there's an update, you're like, okay, I need to redo my whole plan, just step back a little bit and just don't try and keep up with what's going on, because it will just be impossible and you're just going to burn out. And I would say as well, if you are a person who Twitter is your platform, that's where you get a lot of your revenue from. Please start trying to, get on some more platforms and diversify, because if it goes under, it fully goes under. It's better to just try and find some new platforms where your audience are like moving to or spending time already, and try and rebuild yourself over there, because we just don't know how it's going to go, unfortunately.
Yeah. And of course, this also illustrates the danger of relying on any one channel for the majority of your traffic. I know a lot of people who've built their personal brands, they have all their audience on Twitter and they haven't really taken that audience anywhere else. They haven't built an email list and all that type of stuff. Those are the people that are most stressed out right now. And any business, if you're completely reliant on one channel or you're predominantly reliant on one channel, you never know. Like something like this can just come out of the blue and disrupt that. So let that be a warning to all of us. We're all over-reliant on one channel usually at the start of our marketing journeys. And then hopefully as we go on, we kind of spread our resources a bit. But yeah, let this be the nudge if we needed it.
Absolutely. So that's one area that we've definitely seen in the news. Another one, which you may have seen, you may be like, what does this mean for me? I promise we will get to that. But it is FTX and the crypto death spiral, as Tim called it. Obviously, if you are connected into the crypto space, there's been, over the past few years, a lot of scandals. And this year, I think, well, just recently, the scandal with FTX has been pretty huge.
It has. I think for me, FTX is fascinating. Just like, to be completely honest, I've been very skeptical of most of crypto since the start. And I think there was a saying from the first recession where when your barber's giving you stock tips, that's when you know that you're in a bubble. And my barber's been trying to sell me on cryptocurrency for, since I moved here. So that's a good year and a half. So that to me indicates that this is a place for speculators rather than an investment asset class or whatever. But regardless of that, I think the marketing lessons from crypto are really interesting, because this was an entire industry built on personal cult followings, and FTX was a prime example of this. This seems to have been a business that could grow very large because this person did a fantastic job of using so many of the principles that we use to market businesses every day. So influencer marketing, right? He would be on stage with, all these presidents and prime ministers as a way of piggybacking on their credibility, which is exactly what influencer marketing is, right? It's using somebody else to get to their audience and borrowing their credibility to sell your product, which is exactly what he's done here. It's using social proof. So the fact that this exchange was massive and, they made the most of the fact that they were large and that they had lots of investors. Again, that's what we would teach. This is how you want to increase your conversion rate, use social proof. We would advise FTX to use all of the marketing strategies that they use if they're a client of ours. But they use that to scam, hundreds of thousands, millions of people. So this is really interesting. And I have to be honest, I felt a little bit conflicted when this stuff started to come out, because it's like, well, this is a business that is basically pure marketing, right? Anytime there's no sort of back end, this is just a pure scam, then this is marketing. This is unconstrained, pure marketing used to make money. And that's kind of what we teach. That's kind of the game we're in. So for me, it's like another lesson that as marketers, we have to exert our own moral guidance on what we point our craft at, right? For example, at Exposure Ninja, we don't work with businesses that are selling something which isn't legal, or selling businesses which are reliant or could be reliant on exploiting people. And I think we all have to remember that the things that we learn how to do, these are basically tools to manipulate. These are basically tools to encourage people to purchase. Encouraging people to purchase is basically manipulating them into purchase. That's, you know, that's potentially where we're at. So yeah, I just felt like, oh wow, this is, you know, these strategies, these techniques, they can be used for good or evil, and we need to make sure that our compass is, we're always calibrated and we don't let ourselves stray into the dark side, because, you know, worst case scenario, the marketing agencies and the people who are marketing FTX have caused millions or billions of pounds worth of damages to ordinary people, and that's rubbish.
Completely. No, I totally agree. And one thing I wanted to add on to that is, if you're watching this and you're like, well, I'm not a scammer, or I'm really ethical and all these things, the lesson here for you is that we might end up in a period where people are feeling a bit like unenthused with businesses as a whole, whether you're finance, whether you're crypto, whether you're something else. And if your target audience kind of crosses over with, you know, the audience of companies like this, you need to be really aware of, like, you might have to really put the work in order to gain their trust, especially if you're a financial business. Like, pay close attention to the mistakes that were made here, the promises that were made as well, because often we do see in crypto and NFT spaces, loads of promises are made that are just never come to fruition. So if you are making those same promises that you actually can deliver on, you are going to, you know, you're going to suffer, unfortunately. So really pay attention to what's going on, what people are upset about, and make sure that people can trust you in the future, I think.
Yeah, it's like the barrier for trust for this audience is going to be way higher, isn't it? It also got me wondering if there's going to be a period of a group of people that are going to be very disenfranchised in general, because a lot of the promise of crypto was, well, you know, the existing system hasn't worked for this group of people, so, you know, screw that, we're going to go and do our own thing, and this is the hope, this is the brighter future. We're not going to be able to afford our own houses, we're not going to be able to save for retirement, crypto will save us. And then large portions of that savior have turned out to be a total scam, and that is incredibly painful and shocking. If your sort of escape plan turns out to be actually, you know, a doom spiral. And it does make me wonder if there is going to be a group of people that are, you know, if this is going to lead to some sort of rebellion. You know, we saw punk, for example, as a rebellion against the establishment in the 60s and 70s, right? And that was caused by this sort of reaction against what is. And I think we're starting to see pockets of this, whether it's, I saw another pocket of dissatisfaction kind of erupt this week on TikTok with Lydia Millen, who's a sort of lifestyle influencer, very English, countryside, well-spoken. And she'd made a TikTok about, I need to go to, my hot water's broken here, so I'm going to go to the Savoy in London. And, you know, people really, really took poorly to this. They really, really went in on it. And she is still getting hate a week later, which is a long time in, you know, hate spiral viral timeline. So it just feels a little bit uneasy out there. It feels like we have to be more careful than ever about what we're saying and who we're selling to. And like you said, kind of read the room, make sure that the messages that we're going to be putting out are going to be received well, knowing that people are struggling with cost of living, people are scared about jobs and security with recession, and then a whole bunch of people have just seen their future escape plans, their future wealth plans go up in smoke with crypto. As marketers, the information that we share is always seen in some sort of context. We need to be fully aware of that context.
Completely. And you'll find, as seems to happen with these podcasts every week, that seems to be a theme throughout the rest of the discussion. But before that, Tim, would you like to talk us through this week's video that went out yesterday?
Yes, so this week's video is all about B2B lead generation. We looked at some ways to, basically, we looked at our most successful B2B lead generation campaigns for clients, and we said, what are the commonalities? And then we put it into a video. There's 5 or 6 different tips where we've basically taken something from, you know, a bunch of campaigns that have worked well and distilled it into its principles. So if you're a B2B firm, bang on. Even if you're not a B2B firm, you know, we say this is a B2B video, but secret. It's all the same for any type of business, right? These things always apply. Of course, there's different implementations for B2C and D2C, but yeah, that's what it's all about. B2B digital marketing. It's going to be a bit of a niche video for some, but I think some of the principles in here we've seen be responsible for, multi-million growth for clients. So,
oh, absolutely. I completely agree. And one of the things that came up that we kind of had a discussion about this while the video was in process, but it was to do with press releases. And although this isn't necessarily a topic that does affect B2C or D2C, it kind of does, because the message is the same, in that you need to understand what gets your audience excited, what they want to read about. And I sort of shared a story about when I used to work in agriculture, and a lot of the press releases there were very mundane because that was just the done thing, and nobody was really breaking out of that mold. And it was very difficult to convince anybody to break out of that mold. But really, nobody probably cared other than us. Like, it was very everyday stuff. Like, I think some of the examples you gave in the video were like, such and such got a promotion, or we upgraded this part of the office, or we, and it's just very boring. It might be exciting to you, but not exciting to your audience. And I think, yeah, you wrote something here that's fantastic that says not everything needs to be an ad. And I think that's also a really, really good point. Like, not everything that happens in your business has to be broadcast to the world, I suppose.
Yeah, probably most of it shouldn't. So, Jess, I'm interested in your agriculture industry time. What was the goal of people publishing these press releases? What did they hope to get out of it?
I think it was just to say, we've made this great change. For instance, we've got this new machine, or we've upgraded this machine, but the press release would be very, very technical. There wasn't really a lot. I mean, we talk a lot about benefits and features, and I know features are important and features should always be included, but also explain to me how this is going to make my life easier compared to what I have now or everything else that is on the market. And the second thing is stuff like, we've got a new person starting in the office, was a kind of press release that I'd written a couple of times, that would go on the website and be sent out to a few publications. Okay, cool. Why does that matter? What's important about it? What's actually the story there? If the story is that you've just hired somebody who, has all these accolades and is going to make all these different changes to the business, then that's interesting. But if you're just hiring me, then that's not really newsworthy,
Oh,
so I think,
yeah.
but it's not. This is the thing. So I think people, if you are sending out press releases, think about who actually cares. Step outside for a moment, step outside of your sort of work bubble, look at what's being shared, look at what people in your industry are talking about. Like, I used to spend a lot of time on the farming forum just to see what farmers were actually talking about, what are they worried about, what are their concerns, what terminology are they using. And it didn't really match up necessarily, like, they don't really care that much about the individual companies as much as we probably felt they did, because we're passionate about the company.
Yeah. There's a kind of a metaphor I've been thinking about this. So I read the FT, and I read the FT because the articles in the journalism are fantastic, and it gives me loads of really useful information that I can apply to life and business, and just feel a bit more intelligent when I finish reading it than when I started. And because it's good, I read the ads as well as the articles. So because I'm reading, I see the ads. My first job was delivering newspapers, and not like good newspapers that people actually read, like rubbish newspapers, a free newspaper. And for those who live in a world where free newspapers aren't normal, a free newspaper is basically, it's just a book of ads. And then they put like an article on the front cover to try and make you think that it's going to be, full of news, but it's really not. It's just wall-to-wall ads, and even the article on the front is total garbage. And when I'd be delivering these newspapers, and I could see the pile of like the previous week's newspapers that were still there. I could see the recycling bin full of newspapers. Sometimes I'd give them, I'd be walking past the path and someone's there, and I'd give them the paper, and I could see them just go around and just dump it in the trash, And because it was just wall-to-wall ads, they didn't read any of it because there's no value whatsoever. And I think not necessarily marketers, but there is a tendency for some people in the business, usually people higher up who don't really understand marketing, to make all of their promotional activity like that, just wall-to-wall ads. So, oh, great, we've got a Instagram account. So what are the ads that we can post? And they don't post like posts, they just post ads. I mean, they are posts, but they're basically just ads, right? We had a client who was selling supplements for a particular sport, and they were physically incapable of posting anything which was not purely promotional. And the trouble is with that is you're not going to follow it. That you're not going to follow that account because it's just wall-to-wall ads. It's the free newspaper. There's no articles there. It's just ads. And the same with the press releases about, Janet's just started in the office, or we're excited to announce a partnership with John Deere or whatever. Nobody cares. That's just ads. And the trouble is that people then become blind to your information because you are just ads. And the trade sites that publish this garbage, because they have no articles that are being submitted to them which are good, just then become ignored because they're just wall-to-wall ads. And this is the danger, right? This applies to everything. This applies to trade shows. I can go on a trade show tirade if we want at some point, but this is how most businesses approach all sorts of our marketing activity: is how can I get my ad in front of people? And actually, I'm not saying you need to be all fluffy and brandy and, run a podcast and all that type of stuff. I am as conversion focused as you could possibly be, relentlessly conversion focused. We don't do anything at Exposure Ninja that we're not projecting an ROI for our clients on. And we never will, because we are ruthlessly conversion focused. This isn't saying like, oh yeah, it's just cool to just put stuff out there and, hope that people come to you and manifest it. No, I'm not. But you need people to read the paper, right? The reason that you have the articles is to get them reading the ads. And it's exactly the same with this type of press release or any content that you're publishing on your website, or when you're running a trade show or whatever you're doing. Make sure that the article ads ratio is right. Gets me going, Jess.
It's a proper tirade. But yeah, basically, in summary, if you're writing a press release, really step back and think, who cares? And I know that sounds nasty, but really think, who is going to read this? Why are they going to read it? What are they going to get out of it? And if all they're going to get out of it is such and such has a new thing, that's not really enough. It really isn't enough. That might be somebody's first interaction with you. You can't assume that everybody knows who you are. So I think, it's super, super important to think about. But thank you for your tirade, Tim.
I have a PS tirade. If you want to get into industry publications, right? Here's a story from very, very pre-EN days, right? So I used to build websites for tradesmen, and this is what became Exposure Ninja. And these tradesmen didn't have computers, so it's pointless doing digital marketing to them. They, some of them had a mobile phone, but they didn't even have email. So how I would get to them would be in these trade publications. And what I used to do is I'd write an article about, here's how to get business from the internet. Here's how to get more customers from the internet. And I'd send them this article, and the article would say, here's 5 steps to getting more customers. And if you want more information, if you want to see these in action, request a DVD from me. And then I just literally put my phone number, my mobile number, like text me your name and address, text me like PHAM for Plumbing, Heating, Air Movement Monthly, DVD to my phone number. And then on the day it went live, I get like 250 texts. I'd send out all these DVDs, and the DVD had the pitch in. Now, that was way more effective than running ads or running a press release to Plumbing, Heating, Air Movement Monthly saying, hey, can you just post this article on, here's some new technology which might help people. Because I was approaching it from, let me help you. Let me show you how to do something. Let me teach you how to do something. And by the way, if you want some more help doing it, then, we can go from there. So yeah, if you want to get in trade publications, you can get in trade publications, but you're not going to get leads from it unless you're focused on actually helping people. Write the articles, not the ads. Anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that was a very good PS. I'm glad that I didn't interrupt you and say that I need to get onto my brand of the week. But this it will be fairly quick, because I feel like the messaging here is it's one of those brands where they're so cool and they're almost there, but we've got a really important step that they need to take. So the brand is called Houseplant. They sell smoking products, which aren't legal in the UK, but are in like America and different countries. So they're obviously targeting that audience, and they are going into a very oversaturated market, but they're also going into a market where I feel like there's not a lot of like visual innovation in terms of products, right? Like we see a lot of businesses that just start because they see a trend. Like, I think video game drink supplements is a really, really good example because they all look the same. It's like, you know, a black pot with like really neon colorful weird creatures on them. Like I've had a lot of video game like energy drinks. They all look the same. And what I feel like Houseplant has done is they have looked at where there's a gap and gone and filled that gap. They were like, what's missing? Where's there's a gap? And they've realized there's a gap for like interestingly designed products that kind of look nice in your home that are like more luxury. So it's very on trend, and they have a famous founder because Seth Rogen is at the top, and you know there's a lot of stuff on the website like he's designed specific pieces, but that has led to quite a difficult problem that I've noticed they have, which is their Instagram comments are full of people who are Seth Rogen fans who want to buy stuff that he's designed and support him, but don't have the money. And because they're not really, his fans aren't really the target audience. So it's like, they're so close. They're so close to, you know, breaking into this industry and positioning themselves as really different brand. But unfortunately, I think the targeting is wrong. Like I had a look at their SEO and they are ranking for things like standing ashtray. You know, they have these really tall ashtrays or like all-in-one rolling trays, but it's accounting for like less than 0.5% of their traffic. And it's more like Houseplant or Seth Rogen is ranking for these products, you know? And so I feel like this has almost been a product made for fans, but it wasn't supposed to be and it shouldn't be. And yeah, that's definitely one thing that has flagged up. And also I want to see videos of these products. They have all these amazing products. I want to see how they look in action and how they're working. But yeah, I think they're a really, really great example of a brand who have innovated in an industry that's oversaturated and then just drop the ball when it comes to actually marketing it or how they position themselves, unfortunately. But very interesting brand indeed.
Yeah, really interesting brand. I'm glad you brought this up because I hadn't seen Houseplant before this. I think I'm not their target demographic, but
no.
The other, if you haven't seen their products, I think it's houseplant.com, I think.
Yeah, something like that.
And yeah, they sell, so say you want, I mean, smoking accessories in inverted commas, isn't it? Because yeah, this is basically for people that smoke weed and want the stuff that they're using to look cool rather than like skanky sort of crack den vibes. This is more like, you know, if you went around Gwyneth Paltrow's house, this is the stuff that you'd be seeing, and it's beautiful stuff. Like I think this also is an example of a business that has differentiated itself purely by design.
Yes.
And prioritizing design over, you know, making it accessible or, you know, easy to purchase or anything like that, which I think is it's a completely viable position to take. But really interesting that they've maybe gone for the what do we want to sell rather than what does Seth's audience want to buy, which is a very tempting mistake for all of us to make when we're deciding where to position our business.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, you know, there is a lot of complaints on Instagram of people saying, you know, I can't afford this, etc., etc. And just because a brand is expensive doesn't mean it's bad. And these are things that are literally just made to look good and be expensive. And yeah, I think they just have targeted it wrong, unfortunately. So,
yes,
yeah.
I would agree with you. Jess, let's go to your marketing fail of the week. You've actually got two, and you've got a thread.
I have got a thread, yes. So I think we've sort of discussed a little bit about reading the room, especially with current events, reading the room and trying to stay relevant and stay current and potentially jumping on trends or using lingo, trying to fit in while also being not offending anybody or just being just tone deaf. I would use the phrase tone deaf. And yeah, Dale always brings this up. He loves this topic. Curse of knowledge, which is when you think that everybody else understands what you're saying or your thoughts because you know it. You can't unlearn what you know. I experience it a lot when I'm writing, you know, knowledge-based content where I have to kind of be like, okay, if I was learning about call to action for the first time, what would I have wanted to know? And it can be really difficult. It can, you know, you've done it a couple of times, Tim, during this recording, because you said FT And I think you meant Financial Times.
Yeah,
But for me, I was
right.
like, FT, who is FT? And I was like, yes, Financial Times. But it's so easily done. And yeah, we see it a lot with brands. And one that I saw on a smaller scale, although I would argue I say smaller scale in terms of time and effort and thought process that would have gone into it, but I don't mean smaller scale in terms of repercussions, which was one you actually mentioned to me, Tim, which was Tampax made a tweet, which was could have come across as a bit distasteful. I mean, if I would have seen
come
that
across,
tweet,
that's a generous. Tampax sexualized their product and it kicked off.
Yeah. So the tweet was, I was trying to remember the tweet, and then I was like, yeah, I've understood that bit. So the tweet was, you're in her DMs, or you're in their DMs, we're in them. We are not the same. And it just felt like, they obviously saw this trend, which is like, you're in their DMs, we're, in their whatever. We're not the same, which other brands can kind of jump on. But unfortunately, because of the nature of Tampax's products, they sell tampons, the way they phrased it just wasn't good at all. And people really, really didn't take well to this tweet. They were saying, you're sexualizing your product, young people who are under the age of 18 use your products. And it just feels weird that you're kind of comparing this sort of like, you're in the DMs trying to chat them up. We're already there. We're already in the, intimate with them kind of thing. So it was just a little bit like, not great. And I think all that happened here is somebody made this joke in their head, thought that's funny, and tweeted it. And unfortunately, sometimes when you think something's funny in your head, when you say a joke and you say it out loud and everybody around you looks gone out, I think that's what happened with this Tampax tweet. Like, I think everybody in the room groaned, and the person who said it, who totally thought that it was spot on, hilarious, just had no idea. They hadn't even conceptualized that it could be wrong. And I think that's where they tripped up there, unfortunately.
And I expect you. I think they even left it up. Last time I checked, it's still up.
They said something about like, we had to tweet this before the website shut down. So it's also a case of doubling down. And this is something that you mentioned earlier with that TikToker who went to the Savoy because the heating was broken. And when people commented saying, hey, like, it's really nice that you can do that, but just remember you're in a real place of privilege and a lot of us can't afford to turn the heating on. She was like, not my problem, is it? Or like, oh, we had an electric heater, but the dogs needed it. Like, just things that are like so out there that like, just was very just not good at all.
I think that the Tampax thing's really interesting because there are examples of brands, like you introduced me to the marvelous world of Duolingo's TikTok, and Duolingo's TikTok is a fight. For those who don't know, Duolingo is a language app, and they have this like bird mascot thing. And this bird mascot thing posts on TikTok, and it's wild. I've seen some pretty outrageous. This bird mascot has this like undying love for Dua Lipa, and the bird mascot is not afraid to express this love in many, many different ways. And some of them are really on the edge of, wow, like you'd actually say that? And people comment, wow, like clearly the legal team doesn't check your TikTok. Like, what is going on here? So, that, and they get rewarded from it. They get a huge amount of viral traction, loads of engagement. People love it. We talk about it all the time because they are risque. And this Tampax thing, like you can see the game that they're trying to play, but it's just gone so wrong. It's just not the same. Yeah, you're right. We are not the same. You are wrong.
But yeah, it's so interesting, and I think it is like I said, a case of just trying to take yourself out of the moment, or even just run it past someone. If it's going to be a split-second decision of writing a tweet, sometimes just take a breath and say to somebody else, "Hey, does this sound weird to you?" But as I will discuss as well, I think it's just the case that person that thought didn't even cross their mind. They didn't even have that idea. And we saw this again recently on a larger scale with the Waitrose Christmas ad. And I call it a larger scale again because for a tweet to be posted, that's normally quite a quick thing. Doesn't really cost anything. It just, whereas with an ad, There's so much more that goes into this. Like, they're probably planning their next Christmas ad right now. So we have the curse of knowledge again in this situation, in that Waitrose ad was in the news because it was seen to be promoting unhealthy sun practices, like, what is even sun damage? And it's sun exposure. That's the word I was after.
Okay, I haven't seen the ad, Jess. Describe.
Okay,
You've got the curse
cool.
of knowledge here.
I have. I was going to get onto that. So they were following farmers throughout their day, essentially. It's showing farmers, going about their day. And one of the things that popped up was two farmers comparing their tans. Now, if you are not from a farming background, lots of farmers have these really, really awful tan lines, which is like up to here will be like red, like tan, and then everything else is white. And I know this because my dad's a farmer and my granddad was a farmer. So that image, there's just something that's normal to me. So when I saw people get upset because they had seen the comparing of suntans as promoting unhealthy, like, sun exposure, I was like, this is silly. That's just how farmers are. I had that curse of knowledge moment. And then when I actually stood back and was like, just because I know about this and that I know it's about like farming culture, it's a part of that, doesn't mean it's okay and doesn't mean that it should be accepted. So I can imagine the exact same thing happened at Waitrose, where they were like, we don't see this as a problem. Nobody had that thought in their brain, or nobody shared it to say, like, they didn't even think of it. They didn't even, it didn't pop into their brains. Like, you can't know what you don't know. And I think that's exactly what's happened in both of these situations, because they didn't even know that this outcome was even possible. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I think we spoke last week about, like, if just run it past people that aren't like you, run it past people who think in a different way. It's that thing, isn't it? This is an echo chamber. These are results of echo chambers, or not enough feedback, or not enough risk assessment. This is people just going out there. And the trouble is with the world now, and how quickly ideas spread, not just to your audience, but across the world. You might be completely, I'm reminded of when these car companies call their car a name and it means something else in another language, and it's like horrific, because they haven't thought to test it in, Chile. What does it mean in Chile? Well, it means like burn your entire family and, smoke the remains. Like, they haven't done that work, so they've called their car, something horrific. It's that type of thing, isn't it? We need to make sure we're testing outside our echo chamber. Completely.
And I sort of made a note here. If you're like, oh, how does this apply to me, or how can I even avoid these things from happening? I was just kind of like, you almost need to do a risk assessment. Like, you almost need to look at the different elements and, make a note and be like, okay, these two characters are comparing suntans. What could be the repercussions of this? What could be? And I know it sounds really, really clinical and really obsessive, but if you are spending hundreds and thousands of pounds on a TV ad, then you do need to be that clinical. If it's something smaller, or you're a smaller company, just ask people. Like, ask people on different teams. Don't just ask people on the marketing team. Ask other people, like people who man the phones, people who work in the warehouse, just different. Ask your family when you go home, what do you think of this? Just people from different backgrounds and walks of life, basically. And then just say to people, did anything go off? Did you have any warning bells? And also, last thing that popped into my brain before we finish up this marketing fail section is that if you had a campaign like this, and at the end somebody says, oh yeah, well, I did think that, and your reaction is to be, well, why didn't you share it? Go a bit insular and ask yourself why they didn't feel comfortable sharing it with you. Because I often see these things happen. I think if I was on that team, I would have wanted to say something, but people aren't always in a position to, if they've been labeled as the sensitive person, or often get jabbed at for being sensitive about stuff that's actually really important, then maybe they won't share it. And then instead of that just being a jab in the office between people, or, it ends up being a jab of the whole nation who's angry about your TV ad. So yeah, just make sure you're creating a space where people can flag their ideas. Then you do a risk assessment and say, actually, we've looked at this. We don't think that it's that much of a bigger deal. At least they've looked at it. And then if it does go down in flames, that's on them, unfortunately.
Yeah, totally. I think requiring people to raise objections, if you were going to be offended about this, what would offend you? it's that checklist manifesto thing, isn't it? The co-pilot never flags the issue to the pilot because there's a chain of command there, and then the plane goes down in flames because the pilot did something stupid. Whereas if they're both working through a shared checklist, right, let's analyze this piece of marketing content that we're going to push out. And, obviously you don't have to go crazy with this, but are there groups that it's likely to offend? Are there potential repercussions? Like, it's not a bad idea to just think through what are the potential implications of all of this, and say to people, right, your turn. If you were going to be offended by this, what would you be offended by? And then just make sure that everyone, like you say, feels safe to do that.
Yes. And I think the last lesson from that, very, very quickly, sorry, Tim, is that don't be afraid to put stuff out there, but it's also how you handle it afterwards. So if people say, oh, actually, you didn't think of this, like Waitrose cut that part out of their advert and re-uploaded it to YouTube. And, we'll be running it on telly with the tan line part cut out of it. Tampax, on the other hand, left their tweet up and doubled down. And that TikToker doubled down. So definitely think about, have an action plan in place so that if something like that does happen, you're already prepared with what you're going to do. Waitrose could have said, right, if this gets flagged, we'll take it out. We're not saying that you should have to take it out or should have to censor yourself, but just be prepared and have an action plan in place just in case.
Yeah, very, very good point. Cool. Right. As you may know, we've started a section where we get you to ask your top digital marketing questions. So you can ask us if you email hello@exposureninja.com. If you have any digital marketing questions, we will answer them on the podcast. You're supposed to use in the subject line podcast extra or just podcast or something, capitals podcast. We'll find it. So email hello@exposureninja.com with any questions, and we will answer them. So this week's question it says not completely a question, but somebody asked how we are confident on camera and how they could never be that confident. Wow. Jess, what's your take on how to be confident on camera? And for someone who thinks that they could never be that confident, what would you say to them?
Well, I see this quite a lot. We've had it in previous live streams, and I saw this as a comment on a previous podcast. And I've heard this from other people in the company who, after a live stream, will be like, I don't know how you do that. And I'm like, same. And I know that sounds like really terrible, lame advice, but like, I know myself, I'm a very shy person. And I think people, when I tell them, oh, I'm shy, they're like, what do you mean? Like, no, you're not. And I'm like, well, I am actually. And I think really there's a couple of things that you don't see in the, both Tim and I have had quite a lot of practice on camera, whether that's doing YouTube, whether that's like for myself doing streaming, whether that's just personal projects. Like, we've had the practice. And if you look back at our first video content, you'd be like, that isn't even the same person. Like, you wouldn't even recognize us. Like, Tim, there's some videos of you that I'm like, I don't know how you went from that original content to where you are now. Like, it's night and day. And it is really, it's like any other skill. It's about practice. And if you're like, oh, but the first video is going to have to be rubbish, well, then none of your videos are going to ever be good because you just won't do any, and then they'll all be bad. And you just won't, you'll never have the chance to practice and get those reps in.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. It's all about reps, isn't it? Your first 50 are probably going to be rubbish. That's fine. Like, everyone's first 50 are pretty rubbish. That's just part of the learning process. I think it's a bit like learning to speak to people in conversations. I would consider myself better on camera than I am in real life because I actually do more on camera than in real life. So you kind of you get the skills where you focus on. But I also think another part of it is just recognizing that when you record yourself and you listen back, the first thing everyone says, oh my gosh, do I really sound like that? Yes, you do. And all of us listen back to ourselves and think, wow, do I really sound like that? Do I really sound like that? But guess what? Your friends still accept you. Your family still loves you, probably. Like, people still listen to you, even though you sound like high or whiny or low and boring like I do. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, you just have to just do it. Just do it. Like, my practice came from absolute desperate necessity. My first business, in fact, most of my businesses have relied on me being in such a low point financially that I was required to get on a camera and sell something to someone. And guess what? You just find a way of doing it when you put yourself in that position and you say, right, let's just freaking do this. And then no one cares. No one goes, oh, you're rubbish on camera. Like, nobody cares. That's all in your head. So then you become a bit more comfortable and you say, right, okay, let's just do some more. And then as you do some more, I think it's also really important to listen or watch back yourself as well, even though it's horribly painful. Because
Absolutely.
even if you're not writing notes about, oh, I could improve this, I can improve this, you just begin to, you know what, there's a concept in drumming where when you're playing drums, if you're just listening to the drums, you're going to have a bad time, or rather the listeners are going to have a bad time. What you really want to do is hear your drumming in the context of the song. So you want to take yourself out of what you're doing and think about, okay, how is this sounding to the audience? And I think you want to try and do that with video presentation as much as you can. Think about how you're going to be coming across, not just what you're doing. And the only way to do that is to record loads and watch back loads so that you start to make that link in your head. But yeah, like Jess said, the answer is just reps.
Yeah. And if you're wondering what this has to do with marketing, because I realize I probably should have prefaced this with that, is that a lot of the time we give advice that's like, you know, live stream if you can, make TikToks if you can. Obviously, it depends on your audience, but like, you know, we've seen a lot of success from YouTube, and then people go, yeah, but I can't do that. We couldn't either. And then we've put the time in to make the effort to get good at it. And, you know, I think it's a shame if you hold yourself back. And also, one fact that I've learned that actually helped me a lot when it came to like hearing my voice back is something to do with when you speak, you hear your voice differently to how other people hear it, right? Because it's being transported through like the bone in your face and all this stuff. So of course it sounds different when you hear it recorded back. And that's the case for everyone. So if you're like, oh, my voice sounds weird, it sounds different to you. It's not what you expected. So yeah, that definitely helped me a lot when it came to like hearing my own voice back. So yeah, it's just practice.
It's just practice. Just go and do it. Jess, thanks so much, dude.
Thanks for having me. Enjoyed it.
And if you haven't requested your free website and marketing review, you know, Timmy's here with a CTA at the end. Go to exposureninja.com. We'll show you all the things that you could be improving about your website and digital marketing, and we'll send it to you in a video, which we usually send over within 2 to 3 working days. That's probably the worst CTA read that I've delivered in the last year. But anyway, go to exposureninja.com to request your free review today, and we'll see you next week.
See you next week. Bye.